The door opened without warning. Cornelius Vane, Duke of Hartwell, had ridden through the night. His coat was dark with rain, his jaw set hard, and his boots left wet prints across the marble floor of Hartwell Hall as he climbed the stairs without stopping for candle or servant. He had not written ahead. He had not wanted to. A man returning to his own house needed no announcement. He pushed open the door of the east chamber. His wife stood at the window. She was dressed in pale gray, her dark hair loose across her shoulders and in her arms. Wrapped in linen the color of cream, she held an infant, a sleeping child, small-fisted, pink-cheeked, entirely at peace. Cornelius did not move. The firelight caught the child's face, a face round and pale and marked, even in infancy, with something unmistakable. The particular turn of the brow, the fine straight nose, the faint cleft at the chin, that Cornelius had seen every morning for the first 22 years of his life, in mirrors, and on the face of his younger brother, Lord Edmund Vane. His wife turned. She did not flinch. She did not drop the child. She did not reach for explanation or apology. She met his gaze across the room with the steady calm of a woman who had been waiting, not with dread, but with patience, for exactly this moment. "Cornelius," she said quietly. His name in her voice sounded like the closing of a door. "Explain this," he said. The words came out stripped bare. No title, no ceremony. Lady Phoebe Vane looked down at the sleeping child, then back at her husband. "I will," she said. "But you will have to decide first whether you want the truth or only the version of it that preserves your pride." The fire crackled between them. Neither moved. "Before we continue, have you ever known the truth about someone and watched them choose not to believe it? Have you ever been the woman in this room holding the evidence of someone else's ruin and forced to decide whether to speak or stay silent? Tell us in the comments where you are watching from tonight. And if you love stories about women who refuse to be destroyed quietly, subscribe. This one is for you. Hartwell Hall stood 12 miles from Bath, behind iron gates older than the family's current fortune, and younger than its pride. Its stone face was broad and serious, its windows tall and cold in winter, and its corridors carried the particular silence of a house that had swallowed many secrets and digested none of them. Cornelius Vane had inherited the dukedom at 24, when his father died of a swift and undignified fever. He was now 31, dark-haired, with gray eyes that assessed before they welcomed. He was a man who had learned governance before he had learned tenderness, and showed it in the precise way he occupied every room, as though he had calculated in advance exactly how much space he was permitted to occupy. He had married Phoebe Calthorpe 2 years prior. She was 23 then, the second daughter of a respectable but unglamorous baronet, chosen by Cornelius not for love. He would have called that a laughable word. But because she had answered his 3 interview questions with unpredictable honesty and had not pretended to find him charming when he was not. What he had not anticipated was that honesty, in the body of Phoebe Calthorpe, Phoebe Vane, came attached to a will as composed and immovable as good English limestone. She ran his household with quiet authority. She corresponded with his tenants. She had opinions on crop rotation, on Parliament, on the education of the village girls, and she voiced them to anyone who asked and some who did not. Society found her unusual. Cornelius found her inconvenient. Not because she was wrong, because she was frequently, precisely, and publicly right. Then Lord Edmund Vane had returned from the continent. Younger than Cornelius by 4 years, lighter in manner, warmer in face. Edmund had arrived at Hartwell Hall in April carrying Italian wine and a laugh that filled the East Corridor. He had stayed 6 weeks. He had left without farewell. And 3 months later, a child had appeared at Hartwell's gates in a basket lined with velvet, with a note written in a hand Phoebe recognized, addressed not to the Duke, but to her. The basket had come at dawn. Phoebe had been in the kitchen garden, her skirts damp at the hem, her hands bare and earth-stained as she staked the last of the autumn sweet peas. She heard the gate bell before any servant did, and it was she who walked the flagged path to the outer drive. The basket sat on the stone step, wicker, well-made, lined in ivory velvet that had cost more than a servant could afford. The infant inside was awake and silent, watching the gray sky with the uncritical attention of the very newly born. Phoebe lifted the letter tucked beneath the child's feet. She recognized the seal before she broke it. Edmund's ring, a running hair, badly stamped, always lopsided because he pressed too hard on the left side. His mother is gone. Her family will not keep the child. I cannot do what a man ought to do without destroying the one arrangement in the Vane household that functions with any dignity. You are the most capable person I know, Phoebe. I am sorry to ask this of you. I am more sorry than I can write legibly. The child's name is Clara. Phoebe stood in the drive for a long moment. The wind moved the sweet pea vines. The child, Clara, made a sound like a question. Yes, Phoebe said aloud to no one. I see. She picked up the basket. She did not send for Cornelius. He was in London managing the autumn parliamentary sessions and had not written in 11 days, which was longer than usual and shorter than she sometimes preferred. She instead sent for the village doctor, the best wet nurse in the parish, and her personal maid, Dorridge, who was constitutionally incapable of gossip because she found people less interesting than botanical specimens. For 10 weeks, Phoebe managed. She told no one what the letter said. She told no one whose child Clara was. She told the housekeeper only that the girl was the orphaned infant of a distant connection, which was true enough in the ways that mattered. She had intended to tell Cornelius by letter. She had written 4 drafts. She had posted none of them, and now his boots were on the stairs, and the letter was still folded inside her writing desk. And the truth was about to introduce itself without her permission. He did not shout. Phoebe had braced herself for shouting. She had known, during the long weeks of Clara's residence, that the moment of revelation would come, and she had rehearsed for anger. The cold variety Cornelius favored, precise and cutting as a paring knife. Instead, he stood in the doorway and said nothing at all. That was worse. Phoebe laid Clara carefully in the cradle beside the fire and turned to face her husband fully. He had not moved. Rain still dripped from the brim of his coat. His gray eyes moved from the child's sleeping face to Phoebe's steady one and back again. Reading something she could not prevent him from reading. She has been here 10 weeks, Phoebe said. Not a confession. A fact 10 weeks. He repeated it as though testing the weight of it. She arrived by basket on the 14th of September. There was a letter. From Edmund. It was not a question. The color had not drained from his face. He was too controlled for that. But something had gone rigid in him, from his jaw to his shoulders, like a house reinforcing itself against a storm it has seen before. Yes, Phoebe said. Where is the letter? In my writing desk. You may read it. He crossed the room without another word. She stepped aside. She heard the desk drawer open, the soft sound of paper unfolding. She did not watch him read it. She looked instead at Clara, who had curled her small fingers around the edge of the linen and was breathing with total indifference to the crisis occurring 4 feet away. The silence stretched. Then, "You should have written to me immediately." "I wrote 4 letters," Phoebe said calmly. "I posted none of them because I could not determine which version of the truth you were capable of receiving without acting rashly." Silence. "Rashly," he repeated. "You have a tendency," she said, "toward decisive action in situations that require patience." He turned from the desk. The letter was in his hand. His expression had shifted into something she had never seen on his face before. Not anger, not assessment, but a kind of raw, bewildered pain he clearly had no category for. "He left her," Cornelius said quietly. "He left the child. Yes, with you, with me." He looked at Clara for a long moment. Then he folded the letter with very great care, set it on the desk, and walked out of the room without another word. Phoebe listened to his footsteps descend the stairs. She did not follow. She had learned, slowly, across 2 years, that some of the best things she had ever done for this marriage were the conversations she had chosen not to have yet. By morning, every servant in Hartwell Hall knew the Duke had returned. By noon, 3 of them had noticed he had not emerged from the East Library since before breakfast. By 3 o'clock, when Phoebe descended in her workday blue wool to review the household accounts with the steward, the entire staff was operating with the careful, practiced quietude of people who had learned that their Duke silences were architectural, load-bearing, and not to be disturbed without necessity. Phoebe reviewed the accounts. She signed 3 purchase orders. She renegotiated the baker's contract by 6 pence a quarter, which the baker accepted because she had made the same argument 6 months prior, and he had checked and found her correct. She then climbed to the nursery, fed Clara warm milk from the spoon with the silver handle engraved with a hare. Edmund's old christening spoon, which had arrived in the basket with grim aptness, and spent 20 minutes watching the child discover her own fists with the intensity of a scholar encountering primary sources. At 4 o'clock she knocked on the library door. "I thought you might want tea," she said through the wood, "and possibly the truth about what I actually planned to do about the child, since you left before I could tell you." A pause, then, "Come in." The library was a low-lit cave of leather and paper. Cornelius sat at the long table with his coat removed. 3 untouched cups of cold tea ranged before him like failed experiments, and a copy of Edmund's letter flattened on the table, as if he had been reading it repeatedly and finding new betrayals on each pass. Phoebe sat down across from him without being invited. "I intend to keep her," she said plainly. "Not forever, necessarily, but until the situation with Edmund is clarified and a permanent arrangement can be made that does not destroy the child's prospects before she is old enough to have any." Cornelius looked at her for a long moment. "You have already decided?" "I decided in the first hour," she said. "The rest was administration. You might have told me. I am telling you now, 10 weeks later." "You weren't here," she said, not accusingly, simply accurately. "You are rarely here." The sentence landed in the room and lay between them. Not quite a wound, but not entirely comfortable either. "Edmund must be found," he said at last. "And he must account for himself." "Also agreed," she said. "Will you come with me to London?" He paused. "I thought to go alone." "You are welcome to think that," Phoebe said pleasantly. "Clara comes too. That will cause talk." "Everything we do causes talk," she said. "We may as well give them something interesting." London in November was wet stone and coal smoke, and the precise social machinery of a world that ran on who saw whom and what expression they wore while doing it. Vane House in Grosvenor Square had been aired and staffed within 2 days of their arrival. Phoebe installed Clara in the nursery on the 3rd floor, installed herself in the east bedroom as was customary, and on their first evening appeared at Lady Forthright's supper in deep green silk, with her hair dressed high and her spine perfectly vertical, on the arm of a husband who looked, to anyone watching, like a man who had chosen his wife deliberately and found no reason to regret it. Several people watched. The Duchess of Hartwell was known in London circles as a curiosity intelligent, in the way that made less intelligent people nervous, insufficiently deferential, in the way that made powerful people careful, and possessed of a directness that had caused 3 separate hostesses to remark privately that she was not what one expected from a duke's wife. She endured the supper with grace. She answered questions about the country with warmth. When Lady Forthright asked, with the delicate aggression of a woman who had been waiting 3 courses to do so, whether it was true the Duchess had taken in an orphan child, Phoebe replied, "Yes, a distant connection. She has extraordinary eyes," and changed the subject with the clean efficiency of someone closing a window on a draught. Later in the carriage home, Cornelius said, "You deflected her." "I declined to be interrogated over the turbot," Phoebe said. "There is a difference. She'll press further. She is welcome to try." He looked out the rain-streaked window. "You are not afraid of her," he observed. Not admiringly, exactly, more like a man updating a map. "I am not afraid of anyone who derives their power entirely from other people's discomfort," Phoebe said. "It is too unstable a foundation." Cornelius turned from the window. In 6 years of acquaintance and 2 years of marriage, he had found Phoebe Calthorpe, Phoebe Vane, surprising on 12 separate occasions. He had recorded each of them, silently, in the private ledger of his attention. This was the 13th. He said nothing, but he did not look away. Edmund Vane was located 3 days later, not on the continent, as rumor had placed him, but in rooms above a bookseller's in Bloomsbury, which Cornelius's inquiry agent described in his written report as modest, well-stocked with Italian poetry, and smelling of turpentine, as if Edmund had been doing something both artistic and evasive. Cornelius went alone. He told Phoebe he would go alone. She agreed, and then she came. And because his carriage had not departed the Mews before she was seated inside it, he determined that argument would cost more time than it was worth. Edmund opened the door in his shirt sleeves. He had not shaved in several days. He was 27, lighter in coloring than his brother, with the easy manner of a man who had used charm as a primary instrument his entire life, and had recently discovered it had a limit. He saw Cornelius, then he saw Phoebe. His face did the thing Phoebe had never liked about him. That rapid automatic calculation behind warmth, the charming expression, arriving just slightly too late to be entirely genuine. "Phoebe," he said. Is she well?" Phoebe said. "Clara, yes, Clara. Is she well, is the question you should have written. It has been 10 weeks. He flinched. She had the quality, when she was displeased, of making a room feel several degrees colder without visibly altering her expression. "I was ashamed," he said, with the particular honesty of a man who knows his honesty comes 10 weeks too late. "Yes," Phoebe said, "you should have been. Now come inside and explain yourself to your brother, after which we will discuss what is to be done for Clara's future. Not yours, hers. and you will contribute to that planning in every material way you are capable of." Edmund looked at Cornelius. Cornelius's expression communicated many things. Very few of them were sympathetic. "She is in charge of this," Cornelius said. It was the statement of a man who had spent 72 hours adjusting to a fact. "So I see," Edmund said quietly. "Good," said Phoebe. "Sit down." Phoebe left them alone after an hour. She did not explain why. She simply rose, said she would send up tea from the shop below, and descended the stairs with her gloves in her hand. And the door closed, and the brothers were left alone in Edmund's small sitting room and its stacked old Italian novels, and everything that had not been said and everything that had not been said between them for 31 and 27 years, respectively. Edmund spoke first, as he always had. "I know what you think." "You do not," Cornelius said. "You think I am precisely the man you always feared I would become." "I think," Cornelius said, with the deliberate pace of someone constructing something carefully, "that you made a catastrophic choice, and then made a worse one by disappearing. And I think you left the consequence of your behavior on the doorstep of my wife, who is not your confessor, nor your remedy, nor your solution to things you do not know how to face." Edmund was quiet. "Clara's mother," Edmund said at last. We were. I did love her. It was not careless. Then it is a worse grief that you ran." "Yes, it is." The silence was different now. Not cold, exhausted. "Who was she?" Cornelius asked. Edmund told him. "A musician's daughter from Florence. Gifted, serious, wildly unsuitable by every social measurement. Dead of fever 6 weeks after Clara's birth. A family who loved her and could not take the child without unraveling the story of how she came to exist. A man, Edmund, who had failed the woman he loved by loving her without the courage to claim her publicly." Cornelius listened. He did not interrupt. "She needs a name," Cornelius said at last. "Legal, registered, not hidden." Edmund looked up. Phoebe said the same thing. "Phoebe is usually right," Cornelius said. "I have been slow to account for that." Outside, in the grey Bloomsbury Street, Phoebe stood with 2 cups of hot tea and waited the precise amount of time 2 brothers needed to begin to understand each other before she came back upstairs. They returned to Grosvenor Square in the early dark. Phoebe spent an hour in the nursery with Clara, who had developed an opinion about candlelight and expressed it with decisive volume. When the child was finally settled, Phoebe descended to the drawing room where Cornelius sat alone, with a glass of brandy he had not touched. She sat in the chair across from him. The fire was low. The house was quiet. "I would like to propose a formal arrangement," Phoebe said. Cornelius looked at her. "Edmund will acknowledge Clara legally, with whatever social cost that requires. I will continue her immediate care. I would like to establish a household account dedicated to her education and maintenance, independent of the general estate funds, so that her future is not subject to," she paused precisely, "changes in domestic circumstance." What changes in domestic circumstance do you anticipate?" he asked carefully. "I anticipate nothing," she said. "I plan for possibilities. There is a difference." He set down the untouched brandy. "You are speaking of our marriage," he said. "I am speaking of Clara's security," Phoebe said, "which requires structural independence from any arrangement that may alter." He was quiet for a long moment. The fire settled. "Our marriage," he said again slowly, "is not. I have not given you cause to believe it is failing." "You have given me cause," she said, "to believe it is absent. That is a different problem, and one I am not raising now as complaint, only as context for the planning." Absent, he repeated. The word seemed to occupy him uncomfortably. You are in London most of the year, Phoebe said. I am in Hartwell. We correspond on household matters with the efficiency of a well-managed business partnership. That is not failure. It is simply not quite what I had hoped marriage might be. She said it without bitterness. That was the most difficult part, listening to something said without bitterness that should have been said with it. What did you hope? He asked. Phoebe looked at the low fire. Someone who was interested, she said simply. Not charmed, not impressed, interested. The room held the sentence. The account, he said at last. For Clara, I will establish it tomorrow. Thank you, she said. She rose to leave. Phoebe. She turned. I am interested, he said. The words came out unpolished, which was unusual, and she took note of that. I have been managed elsewhere. That is not excuse. Only, I am interested. She regarded him for a moment. Then perhaps, she said, you might demonstrate that occasionally. She left. He remained by the cold fire for rather a long time. The talk, when it came from the direction Phoebe had least expected. Not Lady Forthright, whose assault had been anticipated and deflected. Not the gossip columns, which had noted the Duchess of Hartwell's presence in London, with a paragraph about her green silk. But from Lord Carris, Edmund's particular friend and the man, it emerged, who had known about Clara's existence since September, and had told precisely the wrong person over precisely the wrong amount of port. By the Thursday of their second week in London, the story, incorrect in detail, accurate in outline, devastating in social temperature, was circulating in 2 clubs and at least 1 Wednesday evening party. Phoebe learned of it from her modiste, who had heard it from a countess's lady's maid, which was the fastest intelligence network in England. She sent a note to Cornelius at 11 in the morning. He appeared in her sitting room by noon. She showed him the note she had drafted. He read it. It was addressed to the editor of the Morning Chronicle, and it was approximately 4 paragraphs long. It was precise, measured, and he read it twice to be certain. Entirely accurate. It acknowledged the child. It named Edmund's responsibility in full. It described Clara as a ward of the Hartwell household, and invited any reader with concerns about aristocratic moral conduct to review their own family histories before corresponding. You cannot send this, he said. I can, she said, and I intend to. It will name Edmund publicly. Edmund named himself by his actions. I am simply ensuring the narrative is accurate rather than speculative. He stared at the letter, then looked at her. Really looked the way he'd been doing more since Bloomsbury, with the focused attention of a man who has realized he has been reading something in poor light. You wrote this morning. I write quickly when I am clear about what I mean. He read it 3 more times. He changed 2 words. She accepted one change and declined the other, explaining why, and he listened to the explanation and found it correct. They sent the letter together. Edmund's response when it arrived that evening was a single line. You are both better than I deserve, Phoebe replied. Yes, do better. Cornelius, reading over her shoulder as she wrote it, experienced the distinct sensation of admiring someone so thoroughly that it required him to revise his previous understanding of the word. Lady Harrowgate's annual ball was the most observed evening in the November calendar, and Phoebe arrived in ivory silk, with her hair dressed with seed pearls, on the arm of a duke who had, 3 days since the letter's publication, through 2 awkward club encounters and 1 extremely unpleasant exchange with his mother, stood beside every decision she had made without flinching. Society had not collapsed. This was always the thing about truth, delivered plainly. It denied rumor its oxygen. Edmund had come to Grosvenor Square the night before. He had held Clara for the first time. Phoebe had stood in the doorway and watched a careless young man look child he had made and recognize that some things could not be undone, only carried forward with more care than had been applied before. He had wept briefly and efficiently, and she had handed him a handkerchief, and then they had made a plan. She was thinking of this when she felt Cornelius's hand settle more firmly over hers on his arm. She looked up. He was watching the room, but his jaw had set in the way it did when he was preparing to be disagreeable in defense of something. Lord Carris was approaching. "Hartwell," said Carris, with the easy smile of a man who had not yet absorbed that certain situations had moved past him. "Duchess, a remarkable letter in the Chronicle. Brave, some might say. Accurate," Phoebe said pleasantly. "Brave implies it was difficult." Carris's smile stiffened. "I wonder," he began, "whether the full—" "Lord Carris," Cornelius said in the voice he used for closing discussions. "My wife has characterized the letter correctly. The matter is settled. If you find it unsettled, I suggest you examine the source of your unsettlement, which I suspect you will find is closer to home than comfortable." Carris's face went through several colors. He moved away. "That was well done," Phoebe said. "You would have managed him yourself." "Yes," she said, "but it was still well done." He looked down at her, and there it was, the thing that had been building since a rain-soaked night in the East Chamber. Not the careful assessment of a man calculating social advantage, but the unguarded, slightly startled expression of a person finding warmth in a place they had not thought to look for it. "Dance with me," he said. "You dislike dancing." "I dislike dancing with people who bore me," he said. "That has not been a risk with you." She let him lead her to the floor. They returned to Hartwell in February when the frost was still on the drive, and the sweet peas were 6 months from blooming. Clara was 4 months old and had developed the habit of staring at Cornelius with a direct and unnerving focus that he had begun slowly to return. He did not coo. He did not perform enthusiasm. He crouched beside the cradle with his elbows on his knees and looked back at her with the careful respect due to a person who was only recently aware of the world and was clearly assembling her opinions of it. Phoebe watched this from the doorway one morning and felt something she had not felt in this house before. The particular warmth of a future that was being built rather than endured. Edmund visited in March. He had taken rooms in Bath, close enough to be present and distant enough to be useful, and he arrived every Wednesday with Italian picture books for Clara and a growing painstaking sincerity that Phoebe chose to encourage because she believed in the possibility of people becoming better than they had been. Cornelius remained. This was the change that mattered most. He rode the estate in the mornings. He attended to the tenants. He came to dinner. He came to the library in the evenings and read across the table from Phoebe. And they argued about parliamentary bills and crop reports and whether the East Garden wall needed rebuilding before summer. And the arguments were good ones. The kind where both people arrived slightly altered on the other side. One evening in April, with the windows open to the first warm air, and Clara sleeping in the nursery above them, and Edmund's latest letter propped against the lamp, Cornelius looked up from his book and said, "I have been thinking about what you said in London, about being interested." Phoebe marked her page. "I have not been what you described," he said. "I have managed well and been present poorly. I am aware of the difference now." He paused. "You have been different," she said. "Since November. Is it sufficient?" She considered him, the grey eyes that assessed before they welcomed, but welcomed now with a steadiness she had not seen there before. "It is a beginning," she said. "Good," he said. "I intend to continue." He reached across the table and took her hand, not urgently, not dramatically, with the simple, deliberate intention of a man who had decided that what was in front of him was worth keeping, and that keeping it required presence, not merely proximity. Phoebe turned her hand over and held his. Outside, the spring moved through the Hartwell gardens like a rumor becoming true. Clara Vane was 3 years old and had, in the opinion of every resident of Hartwell Hall, inherited the worst qualities of all 3 adults responsible for her. The Duke's precision, her father Edmund's stubbornness, and the Duchess's habit of asking questions that could not be easily deflected. She had also inherited, though no one said this aloud, the kind of fearless attention to the world that tends to appear in children raised in households where they are genuine rather than performatively loved. Edmund had, at last, done what a man ought to do. 2 years after Clara's birth, he had made a formal and legally registered acknowledgement of his daughter, accepted the accompanying social cost with a straightforward dignity Phoebe had told him was the only currency worth spending, and begun the slow work of being present. He would never be the father who had been there from the first morning. He was becoming the father who was there now. It was not nothing. Cornelius had, at last, done what a husband ought to do, which was, in Phoebe's private assessment, not a dramatic gesture or a formal declaration, but the accumulation of 10,000 ordinary choices to be present, interested, and honest, even when honesty was inconvenient and interest was less efficient than management. He had also, 3 months after their return from London, kissed his wife for the first time with genuine intention rather than marital obligation. And she had taken hold of his lapel with a calm grip that communicated clearly she had been waiting for him to make up his mind, and was not displeased with the result. They did not speak of love immediately. They were both too precise for that. They circled it for a season, examined it from several angles, and arrived at it by mutual and careful consent. But arrive they did. On the afternoon that Phoebe found Cornelius in the East Garden, teaching Clara to identify the sweet peas she had staked that September morning, crouched in his good coat in the muddy gravel, absolutely indifferent to the state of his trousers, she stopped on the garden path and watched him for a long, undisturbed moment. He looked up and found her watching. "She wants to know," he said, "why we grow flowers if we cannot eat them." "That is an excellent question," Phoebe said. "I told her they were for looking at and smelling, and for proving that something can be both useful and beautiful." Phoebe walked down the path to where they were crouched. "That is a very good answer," she said. Clara looked between them with the assembled judgment of the very young and said, "Are you two talking about flowers?" "Yes," said Cornelius gravely. "Also possibly about marriage," said Phoebe. Clara considered this. "Can I have a biscuit?" "Yes," said both of them at once. The Duke of Hartwell stood, brushed the mud from his knee without apparent concern, took his daughter's hand in one of his and his wife's in the other, and walked up the garden path toward Hartwell Hall, while the sweet peas opened in rows behind them, patient as truth and just as quietly certain of arriving. If this story reached you, if you know what it is to be the steady one, the capable one, the woman holding everything together while hoping someone finally notices, Tell us where you are watching from tonight. And if you believe, as we do, that the best love stories are built not in grand moments, but in the 10,000 small ones, subscribe. We will be here next time with another woman who refused to be quietly extraordinary. We will see you then.